Okay, good morning everyone. We will continue our discussion on the spur gear design. Today's session we will cover one of the mode of failure of the gear tooth, that is bending failure. And also at the beginning, before that, we will solve the numerical problem based on the force analysis that we have started in the previous lecture. So force analysis, we determined the forces acting on the gear tooth. So there is a normal force acting on the gear tooth, which we resolved into two forces. Does anybody remember what are the two components that we consider in calculations?
PR and PT.
PR and
And not.
PT. So sorry, it is a radial force. PR is the radial force and PT is the tangential force. Okay, and then we also discuss how to determine the direction of these forces. So let's review that. So the polling form link is there with you. Just for the sake of clarity. So we'll have one question related to direction of the tangential force. So there is a certain way how to determine the force acting on the gear tooth. So the forces acting on the driving tooth and the driven tooth, they are equal in magnitude but in opposite direction. So this question is important because for the force analysis, we should know precisely what is the direction of force. Okay, so we'll stop here. So what the answer given by majority is direction A, which is the correct answer. The way to determine the direction of the force is consider if it is a driving gear, then the direction of the force would be opposite to that of the motion. So here driving gear is moving downward. So direction A is the right, it is opposite to the direction of motion. So that is the direction of the tangential force. Whereas for the driven gear, it will be in the direction of motion. So on the tooth of the driven gear, the force would be in the direction of B. So this is for the driven gear. And in addition to that, there is a radial force also. So if the gear tooth, if you consider, so there are two forces. One is the tangential force, PT, and second is the radial force, which is along the radial direction. So how do you determine the direction of this radial force? It is towards the center or away from the center? Can anybody tell?
Towards the center.
Towards.
So radial force is always towards the center, whether it is a driving gear or driven gear. So that is the condition. That's good. So let's solve a numerical problem based on this case, or means this concept. So here we are considering a two-stage gearbox. So this is gear number 1 for where the input is given. It transmits to gear number 2, and on the same, the intermediate shaft, the gear number 3 is mounted, which in turn measures with the output shaft. So this is the output. And what we have to determine is the reactions on bearings E and F. So just to recap what formulae we require. So let me just take out the design data book. So what formulae we require are here. So we'll be doing calculations based on the formulae which are visible here. May not be. Okay, now it's a little bit. Yeah, so these are the formulae we want to use. We will be using to calculate, determine the value of PT and PR. So for that we require torque. So how do you require, for calculating torque, you require power and speed. So here both power is given and speed is given. So we can determine PT. We can determine MT. Now from MT, in order to determine PT, we require the dimension DP. So whatever gear we are doing calculations, its pitch circle diameter would be required. So we have to determine the reactions on bearings E and F. So bearing E is here and bearing F is here, which means we need to determine the forces which are acting on gear number 2 and gear number 3. So that much we know. And in order to calculate the forces acting on gear number 2, which are PR and PT, we should know how much torque is getting transmitted through this gear, and we should know its pitch circle diameter. Now the data given is in terms of pressure angle and the number of teeth on each of the 4 gears that has been given to us. We don't know the pitch circle diameter. So how do you determine the pitch circle diameter? Can anybody tell? Means, can you guess?
Module into ZP.
Module into Z, but module is not given. Module is not given here. So if you look at the diagram, there are some dimensions given. So one of the dimensions would give us these diameters and module.
Just using center distance and number of teeth.
That's right. So center distance is in terms of module and number of teeth. So using that formula, we can calculate the module, and from module, then we can determine diameter. And once we know the diameter, then we have to calculate the torque and then calculate the force components using the formulae which are available there. Okay, so that's right. So let's do the calculations. So this is the figure. So the first part is to calculate the module or the dimensions. So module of gear. So all gears will have obviously same module. So module, the center distance is given in terms of module as center distance is A, it is M into ZP plus ZG divided by 2. Our model will be equal to 2A divided by ZP plus ZG. So here distance is given as 160. So that is the distance between the two center lines. And for ZP and ZG, you can use either 1 and 2 gear pair or 3 or 4. Both will give you same answer. They have to give same answer. So let me take for the first gear. So it is 20 plus 60. So which gives us module as 4 millimeters. So now we can calculate the diameters. So dp1, that is a pitch circle diameter of first gear, will be module into number of teeth, which will be equal to 80 millimeters, and the diameter of gear, which is 2. So let me not add PG because here the gears are having the numbers. So let me call them directly D1. So D1 is the pitch circle diameter of first gear and D2 is the pitch circle diameter of second gear. So 4 into 60, that is 240 millimeters. So now we have all the information. The formula you can see on the left hand side of the figure, and we can determine the magnitude of tangential and radial force on gear 2 and gear 3. So let's do that calculation. So first we have to calculate the forces on gears 1, 2. So magnitude wise, we can calculate the force either on gear 1 or gear 2. Magnitude will be same, only direction will be different. So we have to, we require the forces on gear 2. So the direction of force on gear 2, we need to decide. So that will come later. First we'll calculate the magnitude. So magnitude I am calculating based on the dimensions of gear 1. Since we know the power and RPM of gear 1, we can calculate the torque acting on gear 1. You can also do the same thing for gear 2 because we can calculate what is the speed of gear 2 and do the same calculations. Here I am doing based on the gear 1 calculation. Okay, so just drag it down. Okay, so I'm calculating the torque on gear 1. So this will be given as $60 multiplied by the kilowatt. So kilowatt is given as 20. So 20 kilowatt into 10 to the power 6. I'm just using this formula which you see on the left hand side, divided by 2 pi into the speed of that particular gear. So speed has been given as 800 RPM into 800. So this will give us 238.7 into 10 to the power 3 Newton millimeters. So once we know the torque, we can calculate the tangential force and the radial force by using the formulae which are given there. So the tangential force on gear 1 which will be also equal to the tangential force on gear 2. So here we are just talking about magnitude, which will be 2 times mt. So mt is 238.7 into 10 to power 3 divided by diameter. So diameter we have calculated as 80. So that gives us PT1 equal to PT2 equal to 5967.5 newtons, and PR1, which will be equal to PR2, would be given by PT1 into tan of alpha. So pressure angle is given as 20 degrees. So this gives us 2172 Newton. So these are the forces which are acting at gear pair 1 and 2. Now similar calculations we have to do for gear pair 3 and 4 in order to calculate what is the force acting at this junction, that is a 3 to 4 junction. So next we'll do that calculation. So forces on gear pair 3 and 4. Okay, so we have to determine what is the torque acting on this particular shaft. So can we take the same torque that we calculated here, or it will be different? How will you calculate the torque which is acting on the gear 3 or 4 for that matter? So you have 16 to 10 to power 6 kilowatt divided by 2 pi np.
We will take the RPM of the second shaft.
Yeah. So here RPM of the second shaft we have to consider, and kilowatt. What will happen to kilowatt? Will it be same or it will be different?
It will be same.
It will be same. So for by conservation of energy, it will be same if you consider ideal situation. But in practical situation, what do you expect? Will the power will be same or it will be different? Power on transmitted by gear 3 will be same as that as received by gear 1.
There will be losses.
There will be losses because of. That's right, Jay. There will be losses.
Friction, for example.
Yeah, so mainly friction. So frictional losses will be there, but as compared to that 20 kilowatt power, they will be very, very small if it is a well lubricated gearbox. So in our calculations, we neglect that. So we consider same power transmission. So we need to know what is the speed of gear number 3. So how do you decide speed of gear number 3? We know speed of gear number 1, which is 800 RPM.
Calculating speed of gear 2.
Calculating speed of gear 2. So that's right. So we need to calculate the speed of gear 2, which is nothing but the speed of gear 3, which is given by the number of teeth ratio. So by this ratio, we can calculate what will be the speed of second gear. So that is 20 divided by 60 multiplied by 800. So that is 266.7 RPM. So that is the speed of third gear or second gear. So MT3 would be given as 16 to 10 to power 6 into 20 kilowatt divided by 2 pi into 266.7. So MT3 is 716.1 Newton millimeters. So PT3 would be calculated using those formula which you see on the left side of the screen by design data book. So that is 2 multiplied by this multiplied by 10 to the power 3. 716.1 into 10 to the power 3 divided by the diameter of third gear. So diameter of third gear, have we calculated or not? Okay, so third gear has got same number of teeth as the first gear. So which means the diameter also would be same. So it is 80 millimeters. So this is D3, which is module into number of teeth. Okay, so it gives us the tangential force as 17902.5 Newton. And PR3, that is the radial force acting on this gear, would be given as PT3 into tan of alpha. So that is 6516 Newton. Okay, so now we have got all the 4 forces and we have to now determine the means we know the forces on the intermediate shaft. So on this intermediate shaft, we know what are the forces acting on gear 2 and gear 3. And by using the mechanics, we can calculate what are the reactions at bearing E and bearing F. So that is what we have to decide. But for that purpose, we have to establish the directions of the forces. So whatever tangential forces we have calculated, we have to assign them directions. And that's what we will do now. So I'm just drawing. So the shaft has got bearing at E and bearing F. Then there is gear number 2. And there is gear number 3. So this is second gear and this is third gear. Okay, so let's see. So first we have to decide what is the direction of motion of the intermediate shaft. Okay, so I'm just okay, so here direction of the first gear is given in looking from the left hand side, it is in the clockwise direction. So what will be the direction of intermediate shaft looking from the left? So if I consider this particular gear, can somebody tell what will be the direction of intermediate shaft when looking from left? It is clockwise or anti-clockwise?
Anti-clockwise.
It will be in the anti-clockwise direction. So we'll have this particular shaft which is rotating in this particular direction, which means the gear number 2 is also rotating in anti-clockwise direction and gear number 3 is also rotating in the anti-clockwise direction. Let me use the color because this direction is important for determining the forces. Okay, so let's first establish the radial force direction. So radial force, so gear number 2, the contact will be again pitch circle, gear number 3 also on the pitch circle. So what is first is the simple thing. So direction of radial force. So radial force magnitude we have calculated. So how the force, which will be the direction of radial force? So radial, as the name suggests, will be in the radial direction. So it will be towards the center or away from the center.
Towards.
So for all gears, it will be towards the center of gear. So for PR2 will be downward. Similarly, PR3 also would be downward. So this is PR3. Now coming to the tangential force. So tangential force would require what we discussed at the very beginning of the course, this particular session. So you have two choices, A and B. And for this, C and D. Okay, so now you have to tell what is the direction of PT for gear number 2.
So it will be A.
It will be A. So how do you, what is the logic that is based? I mean, J, now you don't give the answer. You have given all the answers. Means a previous 3-4 answers you have given. So let others who are relaxing, let them answer.
Force along A would give a anti-clockwise torque.
Okay, so what is the consideration for determining the force? You are right, your answer is correct. Just elaborate it little. So that gear is moving in anti-clockwise direction. So the force.
Yes, sir.
Sir, it is a driven gear, so
Yeah, that is more clear. Means Prasad skip that line. So first it is a driven gear. So this is a driven gear. So we have to, the force, tangential force acting on the driven gear is in the direction of motion. So direction of motion is as shown here, which will make the force on this particular gear PT2 would be in the direction A and not in direction B. So that is the one. And now gear number 3, we have to determine the direction. So gear number 3 is driven gear or it is a driving gear?
driving gear.
Driving gear.
So among gear number 3 and 4, gear number 3 is the driving gear. So since it is in the since it is a driving gear, the direction of force should be opposite to that of the motion. So now what is the direction of PT3?
Towards D.
It will be towards D. So that's right. So this is PT3 and it will not be along direction 3. Okay, so now we have the full information. So we know the location of the gears. So we can analyze this as a problem of engineering mechanics. So we are having the forces which are acting on this particular beam. So if you can directly do these calculations on 3D if you are comfortable with vector method. But if you are not, then you have to resolve this particular problem into two planes. One is the horizontal plane and another is the vertical plane. So in the horizontal plane, consider all forces in the horizontal plane. And in vertical plane, consider all forces in the vertical plane. So then you calculate horizontal reaction in horizontal plane and vertical reactions in the vertical plane. And the resultant reaction will be vector sum of the horizontal and vertical reaction in either of the points. So I'll be taking that approach. If you are familiar with vector methods, you can do this using vector method. But all the efforts required will be almost similar. Okay, so this particular case, we will resolve it into, first is the horizontal plane. In the horizontal plane, you are having the support at E, support at F. So if you look horizontal plane, you are looking from the top. So you are looking in this direction. So that is top view. So this is top view of this particular plane. So in this plane, this is gear number 2. So the force is acting in the direction what you have drawn in isometric in the figure above. So this is PT2, which is we have calculated as 5967.5 newtons. And the gear number 2 is PT3. So PT3 is this direction. So it is acting opposite to that of the first one. So PT3 will be equal to 17902.5. And similar thing we'll have to do in vertical plane. So in the vertical plane, you are having this is E, this is F, and then you have the two gear locations. So radial forces in both the cases, the vertical plane is the front view. So that is a view looking in this direction. So in that case, both the radial forces are towards the center. So both will be acting downwards. So PR2, which is nothing but PR1. So that is 2172 Newton. And PR3 will be 6516 Newton. So what remains is to be done is to calculate the reactions using the engineering mechanics. So I will not be doing, and for that we require the dimensions which are given in the figure. So we are having these distances as 40, 180 and 40. Same case here. So if you do the calculations, you will get the reactions for the horizontal plane as horizontal reactions. This is 2295. Note that means I have not done the intermediate calculation. I am directly giving the answer. So this is E and this is F. This is 14230.2 newtons. So these are the component of the reaction forces in the horizontal plane, and in the vertical plane we get the reaction as 2840.3 newtons and 5847 newtons. So that is in the vertical plane. So the total reaction will be vector sum of these two components and these two components. So if we vectorially add them, that is square sum of squares under root, you will get the total reaction at that particular bearing. And in the next module, we are going to know how do we select bearing for that particular force, means that particular reaction, how do we select the bearing. So that will be studying after a few lectures about the gear design. After we complete gear design, we'll go into that. But this is how somebody, if you will be as a part of your course project, you'll be designing the gearbox. So this is the first step. So do the force analysis, calculate reactions at the bearing, and then you decide the size of bearing. Okay, so this particular force analysis problem is covered here. So anybody has questions at this stage?
Sir?
Yeah, Mukul.
Sir, Do we have to find the resultant forces always, or in the question would it be mentioned that find the horizontal and vertical components from the bearing?
No, as far as force analysis is concerned, this particular up to this stage is okay.
Yes,
If
sir.
we are, but final use of these reactions means calculating these reactions. The main purpose would be to select the bearing. So, what is the reaction coming on the bearing is the part. So, there horizontal vertical doesn't make sense. You only need to know what is the net radial force acting on the bearing.
So,
Which
sir,
will
can
be
we work with the resultant forces on the gears from the very beginning? Because they will be
we
inclined
are
at.
already forked it now. Radial and tangential are in vertical and horizontal plane.
Yes, sir. So find the resultant of those forces in a plane inclined at 20 degrees from the horizontal and consider calculations along that plane only.
No, but those are those vectors. If they are, will they be parallel?
Yes, sir. So
Well,
because alpha is same, right?
yeah, that's right. Okay, so yeah, that's right. Yeah, that is possible. I did not realize that. Yes. So means on the face of it, since they are parallel force, so on that 20-degree plane, we can calculate the reactions. So then the net reactions will be like that.
Yes, sir.
That's right. So let me just again think and confirm on the classroom after the lecture. But yes, these forces will be parallel. The net force will be along the pressure, the line of action, which is same for both the gears. So we can do the reaction, single reaction, and then do it. Yeah, that's right.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Mukul.
Yes. Welcome, sir.
Good. Okay, anybody has any other observation or comment or any other view on what Mukula said?
So the modules of all the gears are same just because the gear teeth are same, right? Like 1 and 3 are same and 2 and 4 are same.
No, model has to be same for kinematic reason. Otherwise, the motion, the involute profiles will not be satisfying law of gearing.
So but it should be same only for mating gears, right? So 1
Oh,
and
okay. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so what you're saying is correct. So that is not stated in the problem. So that is an assumption that model of all the gears is same. You can make 3 and 4 of different model. You're right.
okay, sir.
Usually that is not done because the it is easier to cut the tools with the same. Especially here the gears, if you see number of teeth which are chosen, so they are equal. So you would not like to change the model. So it is 20-20 and 60-60. So that means you have to make 2 gears of 20 teeth and 2 gears of 60 teeth. So in this case, at least one would not select different models for different gears. As we see later on, that model has got important bearing or influence on the gear strength. So since all gear are transmitting same force or same torque, not same torque, same power. So the strength of all gears would be required to be same. So model one would keep different if for some reason gear number 3 and 4 are having some different material. So if it is a weaker material, then to make it strong, you'll have to use a bigger model. So 1 and 2 are of stronger material, 3 and 4 are of weaker material, maybe because it is exposed, the 3 and 4 are exposed to some corrosive or some aggressive atmosphere. So in that case, you have to use some special material and then it will happen. But that is some a very specific case. But yes, your question is good. So yeah, that's right.
Okay, sir.
Okay, so next, let's move ahead. So how the modes of failure of the gear. So there is some reading material in the textbook which I want you to go through. So just to highlight what are the two major modes of failure of the gear tooth is the breakage because of the bending, and second is the wear failure or surface destruction. So in the subsequent discussion of this class, we'll be looking at how do we design gear for each of these failure modes. So how to design the gear so as to prevent bending failure, and second to prevent the wear failure. These two things will be looking subsequently. But this is as to the description of what is the nature of these failures and what is the cause of different subtypes of these failures is given in the textbook. So bending failure, as the figure shown on the right, it happens because the force acting on the gear tooth is in the tangential and radial direction. So tangential is the one which causes the bending of this tooth about its root. So this tooth acts as a cantilever, and if your gear tooth is not properly designed or it is overloaded, then you will get total failure by bending, and the tooth will break as shown here. The second mode of failure is wear failure, that is a surface destruction, or the surface get damaged because the two gears, the teeth are always getting in contact and losing the contact in every revolution. So if your surface properties of the material are not proper, or for some different reasons, you will get destruction of the surface. So the different reasons is abrasive. So there are some foreign particles are there. Corrosive wear, if there is some chemicals are there. Usually the lubricants contain some chemicals which at certain temperature may react with your material. So that is, you can read that from the textbook. The initially the gear surface are not very smooth as in machine, as in fresh condition. So you may have some ups and down, and at high spots which could be there is some initial correction. So they will get some dents at that point where they hit the mating gear. So that is the initial pitting. Destructive pitting is something which will be designing the gear for. So since the surface is constantly rubbing, after certain number of cycles, there will be initiation of crack on the surface. So that is known as surface fatigue failure. So what calculations we'll be doing are essentially to avoid this surface fatigue failure. So that we'll see later on, that we calculate what is the contact stress on the gear teeth, and whether this, how much number of cycles this gear tooth can withstand, or how to design the gear tooth to withstand that contact stress for infinite number of cycles is what is being considered in our subsequent calculations, but you can read the nature. And scoring is something which in the case of overloading, so just like initial condition, there can be high spots, but if you are overloading the gear and also the temperatures are very high, then there can be local fusion or welding of the two gear material for the moment, and then it will be get sheared off. So this will result in sort of what is known as scoring type of failure. So this particular part, this entire thing I want you to study. So it is reading material which is from Bandari textbook. So there is, I think, 1 page reading material is there. So you can go through that. The second important part in any design is the selection of material. So here again, I want to you to read from the textbook. Again, some half page or some material is there. So it deals with what are the different essential properties. So first of all, you require strength in order to avoid the breaking of the gear tooth. And also, as I discussed earlier, that because of the constant rubbing, there is, and also the tangential force also are alternating. So for a given gear tooth, for a certain part of rotation, there is forces acting on it, and the remaining cycle, there is no force acting on it. So the forces are alternating as well as the contact stresses are also alternating. So the fatigue strength for infinite life, which is the endurance strength, is need to be considered. Then for contact stress resistance, we require the wear resistance or surface fatigue strength. So similar to the endurance strength, we have the surface fatigue strength or surface endurance strength. Coefficient of friction. So obviously to avoid the losses, we would like to have the coefficient of friction as low as possible. So you can reduce it by adding lubrication, but also the material also play some role. So if you use material, I think you have come across this particular reducing friction property in your power screw design. So anybody knows what material we use for power screw? What combination of material we use to reduce the friction? So in power screw, you are having different material for screw and different material for the nut.
Sir, for screw we use steel.
Right, stronger
30
material.
grade. Yes, sir. And for nut we use soft material. I guess phosphorus.
Yeah, phosphor is correct. There is some another class after that. So what is that? Phosphor. I could not hear what you said. Anybody else
Sir,
knows? Poonam, I could not listen your last part. Anybody knows? Starting with phosphor, what metal is there?
phosphor, bronze.
Phosphor bronze. That's right. Okay, so similar thing we will see that in not in spur gears, but in the case of worm gears, which we are going to study as a part of this. So there we use the combination of steel and phosphor bronze, just like power screw, because there the efficiency lowest, so there is a lot of losses. So the reducing the friction is very important in worm gears. So there we use that combination. So that part you can read. So material coefficient of friction, and also this gears, because of the high contact stresses, their surface hardness needs to be improved. So the gears are never used in as machine conditions usually for significant means for regular load applications. If there is very low load, then you did not worry about the surface hardness. But if it is there, then you have to make the surface hardness proper. So for that, you have to give some type of heat treatment, maybe nitriding or carburizing or some other way. So this particular heat treatment, you are heating the material, and then in many of the heat treatment cycles, you are suddenly cooling them. So this induces some residual stresses and also some distortion which happens during this if some precautions are not taken. So there are some ways to avoid the distortion. So it depends, the amount of distortion depends on the type of material that you are choosing. So that you can read in the textbook. And of course, you can use non-metallic material. Here our discussion mainly is of metallic material, which is for high load carrying gears. But for load applications, you can use non-metallic materials. What are the different non-metallic materials? You can read in the textbook. So this topic is also for self-study. So from exam point of view, on both these topics, the questions will be related to applications, in the sense a particular type of failure, what would be the cause? So whether it is abrasive, corrosive, initial pitting. So you may be given output, and similarly material related questions would be there. Okay, now let's move to the part of our design, which is we have seen that there are two modes of failure. One is the bending strength, one is the bending failure, and another is the wear failure. So first look into the bending failure, how to avoid the bending failure. So that is known as bending strength calculations. So this particular study was done by an engineer named Lewis. So that was done in year 1892. So it's more than a century old theory. But that particular the equation which is developed, it works properly even now, and it is used for the calculations. So we will look into what is that Lewis equation, what is the bending strength equation or Lewis equation, and then use it for our design calculations. So let me draw a gear tooth. So this is a part of gear tooth. So we know that on this gear tooth, there is a tangential force is acting and radial force are acting. So there is a net tangential force which is acting, which we consider for our calculation, but which is distributed all over the face of the tooth. So because of this particular force, this particular gear tooth, it acts as a cantilever. So that is the basis for this particular theory. So we are considering that this particular gear tooth acts as a cantilever which is fixed at the root of the gear, and at the top of that cantilever, the edge of the cantilever, you are having the force PT which is acting. And then you design this particular gear tooth as a cantilever design thing. So we calculate the bending stress. So bending stress will be given by my by I. So once you calculate the bending stress, then you have to limit that to the allowable bending stress. So that is how this particular calculations work. Now, while doing these calculations, there are some assumptions that are made. So let me list down. So some simplification for the purpose of doing the calculations which are made by Lewis. So this is Lewis equation. So year 1892. So the first assumption that is made is that radial force is neglected. The radial force is neglected mostly because the radial force will induce compressive stresses, whereas the bending will induce both compressive and tensile. So radial force and the failure mostly occurs on the tensile side, because the tensile strength of most of the metals is higher than that in the compression. So radial force, what it is going to do is it will reduce the tensile stress and it will increase the compressive stress. And further, it is not compared to the tangential force, it is of small magnitude. So this one would justify this particular assumption, and as the experience over the century shows that this it works. So eliminating or avoiding neglecting the radial force, the gears which have been designed so far, they are working properly. Then we are considering that PT is acting uniformly over the width of tooth. So width of tooth is this particular direction. So that is usually termed as B. So that is what we will consider. So what will happen if this distribution is not uniformly acting? If there is some non-uniform distribution, like there is some higher pressure here and lower pressure at the other end, for example. So this...
It won't bend uniformly. Like at the higher pressure it would bend more, at the lower pressure it would bend less.
Yeah, that's right. So in effect, what we are considering here is that the force is acting, if you're considering this tooth as a cantilever. So this is fixed end. So if you consider the force uniformly distributed, then this force acts exactly at the center. So it will cause pure bending. But whereas if the distribution is non-uniform, the force would be acting at an eccentric to the vertical center line. So what it will cause is that in addition to the bending, it will cause torsion of this particular member. So this effect is not considered in the calculation. So that is what the second assumption is. Then the third is the stress concentration effect is neglected. So we don't consider the stress concentration effect, which is there at the root of the thread. So here the calculations are done my by I. So we are considering the cross section which is at the base of this particular tooth. So it is only done on this particular face, and that stress concentration because of the corner fillet is neglected. It is indirectly taken care in terms of the allowable stress, but there is no direct inclusion of that in the design formula. And only one pair of tooth takes full load. At a time. So we are considering that this PT, it may be shared by different tooth pairs simultaneously. Means part of the PT will be taken by, major part will be taken by one tooth, and remaining part would be taken by another contacting teeth. However, in this calculation, we are considering that entire force acts on the single tooth. So which is fair assumption, means it's a conservative assumption. So if it can withstand that, and obviously if there are more number of pairs in contact, then that is okay. So with these four assumptions, Lewis started his calculations. He did some assumptions. Since the profile of the gear tooth is of a peculiar type, he wanted to make the gear tooth design as close to what is known as beam of uniform strength. So in strength of material, if you remember, we have studied the beam of uniform strength. So in the beam of uniform strength, if you consider the entire cantilever beam of the same cross section, then we know that the bending moment in this region is small, whereas bending moment is highest in this particular region. So if you want in this particular scenario, if you plot the stresses will be 0 at this end, and they'll be higher at the other end. So that is the stress distribution, bending stress distribution. But if you make this cross section variable, so if you make beam of this type, you can maintain this bending stress instead of this varying. You can make, so wherever larger bending moment is there, you are keeping larger cross section. Wherever smaller is there, you keep smaller. So you'll get bending stress distribution uniform. So this is known as beam of uniform strength. So the Lewis made his theory by assuming this gear tooth as a cantilever beam of uniform strength. So that means everywhere at every cross section of the gear tooth, the stresses are same. That's what its assumption. So for doing that assumption, he has to fit a beam of cantilever, a beam of uniform strength within the gear tooth. So what he did is, we can prove that for making a beam of uniform strength, this particular profile has to be parabolic. So that can be shown, means you can also derive it very easily. So we know that the profile is parabolic and it did not be on one side. So you can have beam of uniform strength, which is of this type or similar to the gear tooth. So it could be of this type. So that is something similar to the gear. So he fitted this uniform strength gear within the gear tooth. So what he did, he fit two parabolas. One para at the condition is that the parabola is tangent to the root profile of the gear tooth. So it is tangent here, and the other part of the gear. So if you have parabola, so this particular parabola is tangent to base profile of gear tooth, and wherever it meets the line of symmetry, so on the top it is also tangent to the horizontal line. So this particular parabola is tangent to horizontal line. Now there is only one way by which you can fit the parabola which is tangent to horizontal line at the top and tangent to the involute profile at the bottom. So you have to find it out. Means during his time he found out it by graphical method, that is by actually drawing the profile of parabola within the gear tooth profile, and then he determined what will be the height of this beam of uniform cross section. And in his calculation, the PT is assumed to be acting at the tip of this cantilever. So the PT acts at the top of this beam of uniform strength. And this H parameter, it depends on the tooth profile parameter. So depending on the tooth profile, this H during this time he calculated by graphical methods, and also some analytical methods were developed to calculate this particular H. And based on that, he did the calculations, and this particular H was tabulated in terms of what is known as Lewis factor. We'll see what is that Lewis factor and how it includes this H. So having understood that we are considering this particular case, if you look, one more thing we need to know is the bending cross section. So the parameters which we require is, one is T, which is the base thickness of the gear tooth, and second is the face width of the gear tooth. So this is the face width of the gear tooth, which is in the third dimension. So this is dimension B. So this is the cross section on which the calculations are done, and whatever bending stress are there in Lewis formulation, this particular stress is constant throughout the length of the tooth. It's that virtual tooth what we considered inside. So those stresses are constant. So let's calculate the stress on this particular cross section. So the bending stress would be given as My by I. So M is the bending moment acting on this cross section. So we are talking here about this cross section. So the force acting here, and we are calculating stress at this point. So can you tell what is the value of bending moment in terms of PT?
PT into H.
So it will be PT multiplied by H. Okay, so multiplied by Y. Y is the distance of top fiber from the neutral axis. So here the neutral axis is this plane. So what will be the value of Y?
T by 2.
It will be T by 2. And divided by I, where I is the area moment of inertia of this particular cross section. So this cross section, this is dimension T. So it will be 1 by 12 BT cube. Okay, so now what Lewis did, or till now all the machine component, most of the machine components that we discussed about, they were based on the allowable stress. So we calculate the stress induced in that component and compare it with the allowable stress. So in gear design, because of the legacy, these calculations are done on the force basis. So whatever by force analysis, you know what is the tangential force which is induced, and in the strength calculations, we don't calculate stress because of that load, but we calculate what is the allowable load. So instead of calculating the induced stress and allowable stress, here we calculate the induced load and the allowable load. So that is how the calculations are done. And what we are doing here, so here PT is the allowable load. So depending on the sigma B, which is the allowable bending stress, we'll calculate the allowable tangential force. So the equations are written in terms of the allowable tangential load. So same thing we'll be doing for the wear design also, and for all the other types of the gears. So that's why we rewrite this equation in terms of PT. So PT is the allowable tangential load or tangential force. So if you rearrange the terms, you will get it as B into sigma B multiplied by T square by 6H. And we'll just multiply this equation by M, that is module. Multiply and divide by module. So we'll get 6mH. Now this term in the parenthesis, we call it as capital Y, which is known as Lewis form factor. So Lewis form factor is nothing but depends on the root thickness of the teeth and the height of the equivalent beam of uniform strength, which has to be determined graphically. So Lewis and his team, they did the compilation of this particular data for large number of different gear profiles, and this data is available in terms of the number of teeth. So this Y is available as function of number of teeth, and that is available to you in the design data book. So if you look into design data book, you will find that you will get a table. So Lewis form factor for 20-degree full depth involute system, which is the most common. So in this particular table, you will get the number of teeth. So Y factor is given in terms of number of teeth. So starting with 15 number of teeth. So this is one part of the table. So 15 to 26, then 26 to 27 to 50, and then 55 to infinite. That is the rack is having the infinite number of teeth. So the Lewis form factor is given in this particular table, which we'll be using in our calculations. So we obtain the Lewis form factor from this particular table. Now just observe the variation of this Lewis form factor. You'll observe that as the number of teeth are increasing, the Lewis form factor also continuously increases. So as the number of teeth are increasing, the Lewis form factor also increases. So that is one observation you have to keep in mind. And let's go back to our calculation, our formula. So we calculate that PT is given by this particular formula. So this is known as the Lewis equation, or the bending strength equation. So in this particular equation, you get to know this particular thing. And we know that Y is directly proportional to the number of teeth. So as number of teeth increases, the Y increases. So looking at this equation, can you tell out of pinion and gear, The pinion is the smaller gear and the gear is the larger part of the pair. So between pinion and gear, which will have higher strength? So note that here PT is the allowable tangential force. So which can take higher tangential force? Pinion can take or gear can take? So both pinion and yeah.
So gear has higher number of tails.
Okay.
So strength of gear will be more.
Strength of gear will be always more provided the module has to be same between the two. The phase width also has to be same. The third part is sigma b. So unless your sigma b is different for pinion and gear, which can happen if a pinion is of one material and gear is of another material, only in that case, whatever just now I said will not be true. In some cases, that is, if your strengths are different, then that strength multiplied by Lewis form factor product has to be considered for comparison. But if both pinion and gear are of the same material, in that case, the gear will be always stronger among the pair. So while designing the gears, so this implies that the pinion is weaker among the gear and pinion. The strength of pinion will be weaker because of the smaller Lewis form factor. So which implies that you will have to use the pinion for, so if you are having same material between gear and pinion, so pinion will be used for design. Provided the material is same for pinion and gear. So if the material is same, then you need to do calculation only for the pinion. There is no need to do calculations for the gear. So among the every mating pair, you need to design only the smaller gear and for bending strength, and that is what we'll do. Now there is some quiz question coming up. So let me bring up my form. Okay, so which of the following is not an assumption made while deriving Lewis equation? Okay, so we are getting the answer. So most of you have given first, which is correct. So radial force is not considered. So this is the answer. That means radial force is not included, whereas this statement states that it is included by proportion to the tangential force. So that is just which is not true. So radial force is totally neglected. The remaining two assumptions are correct. I think I may have one more question. Okay, so this is a simple one since we discussed it just now. Okay, so your enthusiasm is dwindling, so number of responses are reducing question by question. So it is first one is correct. So we just now saw that Lewis form factor increases with number of teeth. So higher the number of teeth, the Lewis form factor will be higher. So which means that the gear tooth, provided the other things remain same, will be stronger. So that is the thing. Oh, we have one more. Okay, we did not discuss about the allowable bending strength. Okay, we did not discuss the allowable bending stress. So let me talk with respect to this particular equation. So in the Lewis equation, which is Pt equal to mb into sigma b into y. So in this particular equation, sigma b is the allowable bending stress. So this particular allowable bending stress is considered as a function of tensile strength. So usually the allowable bending strength is taken as ultimate tensile strength by 3, sorry. So it is taken as the ultimate tensile strength divided by 2. So rather than assumption, so which is for the textbook or the student purpose, if you look in outside, everybody will have their own criteria for deciding the bending strength, allowable bending stress. For the purpose of this course and from the textbook, we are considering this bending stress as UTS divided by 3, which means that this particular answer, the second answer, is the actually it is not, yeah. So allowable bending stress in equation is not tensile ultimate strength. It depends on, is dependent on the tensile ultimate strength. Okay, now before we close today's class, let's consider so Lewis equation gives us what is the allowable. Now in order to compare this, so this PT is allowable. So this PT must be higher than what is PT which is induced. That is a tangential force which is actually acting on the gear tooth should be smaller than the PT which is obtained from the Lewis equation. So this is from Lewis equation. So Lewis equation number should be higher than the actual force which is acting on the gear tooth. Now actual force which is acting, we are already done by the force analysis. So force analysis gives us the theoretical value of PT. Now this PT value is not used as it is because there are some considerations which are to be taken into account. So there are considerations which need to be taken while correcting it. So first thing is because of the service effects. So you may have the driving gear, and means you are doing some power transmission through the gear train. So in this power transmission, there is some driving mechanical system and there is some driven mechanical system. So for example, if you are considering a centrifugal pump, you have at one end electric motor, so that is the driving device. Then you have gearbox, which will have this gear system, and then you are having, so you are having an electric motor which is driving the gearbox, which is transmitting to gearbox, and then you have the pump, and within this you have the gear pair. So if you are designing this particular set of gears, the nature of driving system and nature of the load. So this is driving system, and on the other side you have load system. So the nature of these two needs to be considered in the calculations. So that particular effect is known as the service factor. So it is taken care by means of a service factor. So our load will be calculated, will be corrected by considering a service factor load. So which will be so those service factors are given in these two tables. So table 17.9, it gives you the service factors. So you have to take service factor from this particular table. Now this table has got two parts, two dimensions. One is what is the characteristic of driving machine and what is the characteristic of driven machine. So driving side and driven side. So driving side can be uniform, or it could be light shock or medium shock. Similarly, driven side, it could be a uniformly performing machine, or machine which is having moderate shocks, and machine which is having heavy shocks. Now, in order to just provide some clue as to how do we decide this, they have given examples. So, for example, if the driving machine is an electric motor, it would be considered as a uniform in the row. And the driven machine, if it is belt conveyor, then it will be considered uniform. If it is a press, then it will be considered as heavy shock. So by using this particular table, one can calculate the factor which is known as service factor. So service factor is given by this particular thing. In case of electric motors, sometimes the service factor is defined in terms of the starting torque by rating torque. So usually the electric motors will have a high starting torque. So that is momentarily your gears which are attached to it, gear train which is attached to the electric motor, will have to sustain that higher torque. So that can be taken care by considering CS as the ratio of starting torque by rated torque. So no further effect of this service factor need to be considered. So service factor is given, then we need to electric motor, the service factor is directly starting torque by rated torque. Okay, now let's go back to our discussion. So we are talking about the induced load, which is corrected by some factors. So this corrected load is known as the effective load. So this is nothing but the induced load on gear tooth, which is corrected for different types of factors. So one of the factor which we considered is the service factor, which depends on the nature of the driving system and driven system. So effective load is given as PE. Let me just see what nomenclature I'm using. Okay, so we are calling it as P effective, PEFF. So that is CS, that is service factor, multiplied by PT. So PT is our theoretical tangential force. So that is one part. There is one more part which needs to be considered. That is the gear tooth when they are engaged with each other. It is not, unless it is a very light load service, the engagement and disengagement is not smooth. So there is, during engagement there is some impact, and during disengagement there is another type of impact. So that is known as the dynamic effect. So this particular dynamic effect needs to be considered. So let me take a page. So dynamic load on gear tooth. So this dynamic load on gear tooth, it comes because of various reasons. One particular thing is inaccuracies in manufacturing. So if it is a perfect involute, then you will get smooth motion. But if it is not perfect involute, then you will get some kind of dynamic or non-uniform forces will come, and that needs to be considered. So all of these are dynamic. So it will not happen If you're just slowly moving the thing, if you are moving at very high speed, then this effect start dominating. So the errors in manufacturing of the gear profile, they will be one of the factors. Then errors in tooth spacing, which is again related to the first point. Either profile can be wrong or the spacing between the gear tooth, it could be wrong. The third is misalignment between bearings. So if your gear shaft is not mounted properly in the bearings, then you will get jerky motion. Then elasticity of part. So if your shaft is very thin or very small diameter, and the loads means if you make it of very high strength material, so because of which you can reduce the diameter. But what happens by reduction in diameter? Its stiffness reduces. So when the forces are acting on that, the shaft will start deflecting. So this deflection will happen when the load is maximum, and when and this will lead to sort of vibration in the system, which is again part of the dynamic load. And last part is inertia of parts. So different parts will have different mass moment of inertia. So this is mass moment of inertia, which needs to be considered. So in order to consider this particular effect, we use some kind of dynamic load factor. So there are two ways to consider this dynamic load effect. One is known as velocity factor method. And the second one is known as Buckingham load method. So in the next class, we'll look into these two methods by which the effective load, that is the actual load which is acting on the gear, need to be corrected. So what one thing is it needs to be corrected for type of service, and second thing is it needs to be also corrected for the dynamic load effects which we discussed just now. So we will continue this discussion in our next lecture. So we'll stop it here for today, and if you have any questions, then you can ask in the remaining 2 minutes. Okay, so if you are not having any questions, we will stop for today. So, okay, just one announcement is for today's batch. So I think today's batch is batch B, tutorial batch. So this week we'll have a tutorial. So I think from 12:20 to 1:20, you don't have any lecture as per timetable. Maybe some shifting may be there. So can we start the only Monday's batch practical or tutorial from 2 o'clock instead of 2:10, because I have got another meeting starting at 3 o'clock. So I would like to start at 2 o'clock on every Monday for batch, whatever batch is today, and then we'll stop at 3 o'clock. So is that okay? Anybody from today's batch?
Yes, I think it will be okay.
Yeah, because you don't have any lecture before the lunch. Okay. So every Monday we'll start the tutorial at 2 o'clock and we'll end it at 3 o'clock. Okay, so thank you all, and we'll stop here for today. We close the recording.
Thank you so